The silence in the house had become a tangible thing since the twins left for college. Not an unwelcome silence, mind you. For years it had been a cacophony of slammed doors, booming music, and frantic, "Have you seen my—" Now it was just the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old oak floors. My wife, Carol, seemed to fill it with her own quiet presence, tending to her garden, with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Her lips often pursed in a way that suggested a deeply ingrained, unspoken worry. I, on the other hand, had found a strange sort of peace in the emptiness. I'd finally started that woodworking project I'd been dreaming about for years, the scent of sawdust, a welcome change from the lingering aroma of teenage angst. Christmas had been, as always, a whirlwind of twinkling lights, forced carols, and the frantic wrapping of gifts. The kids, bless their hearts, had been home, filling the house with their boisterous energy, making the silence feel even more profound when they'd driven away, bags packed and futures beckoning. We'd exchanged gifts, shared a decent meal, and Carol had even managed a genuine smile when I presented her with that antique locket she'd admired at the flea market months ago. It had been nice. A fleeting moment of normalcy before the quiet descended again. It was mid-January when I noticed it. Tax season was approaching, and I'd decided to do some proactive budgeting, a habit I'd cultivated over years of careful financial planning. Our joint savings account, the one we diligently filled for emergencies, for retirement, for whatever life decided to throw at us, seemed unusually light. I'm not one to obsess over numbers, but I do keep a general sense of where things stand. This felt different. This felt like a significant dip. I logged into our online banking, my fingers clicking through the familiar interface, and then I saw it. The number. It was drastically lower. Not just a few thousand here and there from an unexpected bill. This was a chasm, a gaping hole where a substantial chunk of our savings used to be. $300,000. Gone. My breath hitched. This wasn't possible. This had to be a mistake. A glitch in the system, perhaps. I refreshed the page. The number remained stubbornly, horrifyingly the same. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of disbelief and dawning dread. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my eyes scanning for any clue, any explanation. There were the usual recurring bills, the occasional grocery run, a few online purchases that seemed innocent enough. But nothing, absolutely nothing, explained a deficit of this magnitude. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I'd always thought the balance was higher than it actually was. But no, I was sure. I had a pretty good mental map of our finances, and $300,000 was not a number that easily slips from one's memory. It was the down payment on a house, the college fund for our now-departed twins, a substantial chunk of our retirement cushion. It was security. It was the peace of mind I'd worked my entire life to build. Slowly, painstakingly, I opened my eyes and looked at the screen again. The numbers were stark, unyielding. They didn't lie. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Who else had access to this account? Just Carol and me and the twins, but they wouldn't. They knew better. A wave of nausea washed over me. I needed to talk to Carol, immediately. I got up from my desk, my legs feeling strangely heavy, and walked into the living room. She was curled up on the sofa, a book open in her lap, her brow furrowed in concentration. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow on her face, softening the lines that had begun to etch themselves around her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I saw the young woman I'd fallen in love with, vibrant and full of laughter. But that woman seemed a million miles away now, replaced by this quiet, almost withdrawn version of herself. "Carol," I started, my voice a little rougher than I intended. She looked up, a faint, questioning smile on her lips. We need to talk about our savings." Carol closed her book, her movements deliberate, unhurried. "Oh?" she said, her voice calm, almost serene. "What about them?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my own rising panic from spilling out. "The joint account. It's significantly lower than it should be, by about $300,000. Her eyes widened, but not with the shock I expected. It was more of a mild surprise, like finding a misplaced item. She set the book aside and shifted on the sofa, her gaze drifting towards the window. "Oh, that," she said, her tone so casual it felt like a slap in the face. "Yes, I helped my mom with it. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. You what? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. You helped your mom with $300,000. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. Yes, she needed it. It was an emergency. An emergency. Carol's mother, Martha, was a woman of modest means, living a comfortable but not extravagant life in a small town a few states away. She'd never been one to ask for help, always fiercely independent. And an emergency that required $300,000. What kind of emergency was that? A private jet breaking down on a remote island. A sudden urge to buy a small country. What kind of emergency, Carol? I asked, my voice tight with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. And why wasn't I consulted? That's our entire emergency fund. She shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement of her shoulders. It was the same shrug she'd given when the twins had asked if they could get a dog, or when I'd suggested a weekend trip to the mountains. A shrug that dismissed my concerns, that sidestepped direct engagement. It was urgent, she said, her gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. She was in a difficult situation. I couldn't let her down. But $300,000? Carol, that's a fortune. We've been saving that for years. For retirement, for unforeseen circumstances, for our future. The words tumbled out, laced with a desperation I couldn't quite suppress. She sighed, a soft, weary sound. I know, John. I know it's a lot. But family is family. I had to help her. But you didn't even tell me, I said, my voice rising. You just took it, without a word. You know how much we've worked for that money. You know what it means to us. Her eyes finally met mine, and there was a flicker of something in them. A mixture of guilt, perhaps, and a stubborn defensiveness. I knew you'd worry, she said, her tone laced with an edge of exasperation. I knew you'd overthink it. I just handled it. Handled it. As if she'd handled a leaky faucet, not a financial catastrophe. My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of it all. Carol, my wife of 20 years, the mother of my children, had essentially given away a third of our life savings without a conversation, without a consultation. And her explanation was a shrug and a vague mention of an emergency. Carol, this isn't just about the money, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It's about trust. It's about us. We're supposed to be a team. We make decisions together, especially decisions this big. She looked away again, her gaze returning to the window. I did what I thought was right, John. The conversation, if you could even call it that, had stalled. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusations and a chilling sense of disconnect. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the silence stretching between us, punctuated only by the distant chirping of birds. The $300,000 was gone, yes, but in that moment, I felt like something far more valuable had also vanished, the foundation of our marriage. The next morning, the house felt even colder, the silence more oppressive. Carol had barely spoken at breakfast, her focus solely on her coffee and the morning paper. I, on the other hand, felt a gnawing anxiety that wouldn't let me rest. The image of that depleted savings account haunted my thoughts, a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. I needed answers. I needed to understand the nature of this emergency that had warranted such a drastic and unilateral decision. I'm going to call your mother, I announced, my voice determined, as Carol cleared her plate. She froze for a moment, her hand hovering over the stack of dishes. John, I really don't think that's necessary. Why not? I countered, my eyes locked on hers. She's the one who supposedly needed $300,000. I think I have a right to know what's going on, don't you? A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed her face before she masked it with her usual placidity. Mom she's private about her finances. She wouldn't want to discuss it with you. But you discussed it with me, didn't you? I retorted, the sarcasm evident in my tone. Or rather, you told me about it. There's a difference. She sighed, turning away to rinse the dishes. I'll talk to her. I'll explain everything. No, Carol, I insisted, stepping closer. I'll talk to her. I need to hear it from her. I need to understand why you felt you had to drain our savings without even a discussion. The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Carol's shoulders were tight, her movements stiff. John, please, let me handle this. Handle what, Carol? Handling it means talking to me. It means being partners. This isn't handling it. This is taking over." She finally turned around, her eyes holding a mixture of frustration and a hint of pleading. "Please, John, just trust me on this." But trust was exactly what was fractured. The $300,000 was a gaping wound, and her evasiveness was only widening it. "I can't trust you when you make decisions like this behind my back," I said, the words heavy with disappointment. "I'm calling her." Ignoring her protests, I walked into the study and picked up my phone. I dialed Martha's number, my heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. It rang several times before she finally answered, her voice a familiar, slightly reedy sound. "Hello? Martha? Hi, it's John." There was a slight pause. "John? My dear, what a surprise. Is Carol there?" "She is," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm calling you about something important. Carol mentioned you were having a bit of an emergency, that she helped you out financially." The silence on the other end was more telling than any words. It stretched, taut, and uncomfortable. "Oh," Martha finally said, her voice now guarded. "Carol mentioned that, did she?" "Yes, she did. And well, the amount she mentioned was significant. $300,000. I was just hoping you could shed some light on what's going on." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "It was a private matter, John. A personal concern. Carol was very generous, and I'm deeply grateful." "A private matter?" "Martha, with all due respect, when $300,000 of our joint savings disappears, it ceases to be entirely private. What was this emergency?" This time her response was sharper, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. "I don't see why that's any of your concern, John. Carol is my daughter. She chose to help me and I accepted, that's all there is to it." Her tone was dismissive, shutting down any further inquiry. It was clear she wouldn't give me any details, just as Carol wouldn't. The evasiveness was a family trait, it seemed. But the money was ours. It wasn't just Carol's to give away, and it certainly wasn't Martha's to receive without a proper explanation to her son-in-law. "Martha," I said, my voice firm but polite. "Carol acted without my knowledge or consent. This isn't a small sum, it's our financial security, and I deserve to know why it's gone." She huffed, a sound of impatience. "Honestly, John, you're being rather dramatic. It's handled. That's all that matters. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other things to attend to." And with that, she hung up. I stared at the dead receiver in my hand, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Evasive, dismissive, shut down. It was the same song, different singer. Carol and her mother had conspired to drain our savings, and they were both united in their refusal to offer a single coherent explanation. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a conspiracy of silence, and I was on the outside looking in. The conversation with Martha had been a dead end, reinforcing my suspicions that something more complex and potentially more troubling was at play. The casual shrug from Carol, her mother's guarded and dismissive responses, it all pointed to a deliberate withholding of information. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, a piece that Carol and Martha were intent on keeping hidden. Sleep offered little respite. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying snippets of conversations, searching for inconsistencies, for clues. I considered the possibility of a medical emergency, a serious illness that Martha might have been too proud or too embarrassed to discuss. But $300,000, that seemed like an extraordinary amount for even a significant medical procedure, especially for someone who lived a relatively modest life. Could it be a debt? A gambling problem? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The next few days were a tense dance of strained politeness and unspoken accusations. Carol remained distant, her interactions with me brief and superficial. She'd ask about my day, offer a brief comment on the news, but anything that veered towards our finances or her mother's situation was met with a polite deflection or a hurried change of subject. I tried to approach her again, gently at first. "Carol, we can't just let this go. We need to talk about it. What exactly did your mother need that money for?" Her response was always the same. "I've told you, John. It was an emergency. She's taken care of now, and that's what matters." "But it's our money, Carol, and I'm not asking for intimate details of your mother's life. I'm asking for transparency about our shared finances. This level of secrecy is damaging our marriage." She'd sigh, her eyes clouding over, and retreat further into her shell. "You're making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be." This dismissal, this minimization of my concerns, fueled my determination to uncover the truth myself. I realized I had to become a financial detective. I needed to dig deeper, to find the threads Carol and Martha were so desperately trying to conceal. My first step was to review our bank statements meticulously, going back several months. I wasn't just looking for the $300,000 withdrawal. I was looking for any unusual patterns, any large transactions that might have preceded it, any hints of Carol accessing funds for purposes beyond our usual household expenses. I meticulously cross-referenced them with our credit card statements and our other investment accounts, creating a detailed financial map. The sheer volume of transactions was overwhelming at times, but I was driven by a sense of urgency. I remembered Carol mentioning her mother had been struggling with some home repairs a while back. Could it be related to that? But even extensive repairs wouldn't warrant a sum like that. Then, buried in the transaction history, I found something. A series of smaller but significant wire transfers from our joint account to Carol's personal account, occurring over several months leading up to Christmas. These transfers weren't huge individually, a few $1,000s here and there, but cumulatively they added up to a substantial amount. This was new information. Carol had never mentioned moving money into her personal account like this, and certainly not in such quantities. This suggested a deliberate plan, a calculated withdrawal of funds that had been happening long before the $300,000 transfer. It wasn't a sudden, impulsive decision. It was a methodical siphoning. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I started researching common financial scams and money laundering techniques just in case. While unlikely, I couldn't rule out any possibilities. I also looked into Carol's mother's financial situation more discreetly, using public records and online resources. I found no evidence of her owning any significant assets or having any large debts that would justify such a massive sum. The more I dug, the more questions I found. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't fit together in any logical way. The casualness of Carol's confession, the evasiveness of her mother, the hidden transfers, it all felt like a carefully constructed facade. I was looking at the surface, but the real story, the true motive, lay hidden beneath. I needed to find a way to break through the silence, to force Carol to confront the truth, whatever it might be. The peace I'd found in the quiet house was long gone, replaced by a gnawing suspicion and a desperate need for answers. The discoveries from the bank statements gnawed at me. The hidden transfers to Carol's personal account were a red flag, waving a clear signal that something was amiss. It wasn't just a spontaneous act of generosity towards her mother. It was a calculated, prolonged withdrawal of funds. I felt like a stranger in my own home, married to a woman who was now a complete enigma. I decided to try a different approach with Carol. Instead of direct confrontation, which always seemed to push her further away, I tried a softer, more concerned tone. "Honey," I began one evening, finding her engrossed in a gardening magazine, "I'm worried about you. You seem so distant lately. And this whole situation with your mom, it's clearly weighing on you. Maybe if we just talked about it, really talked, we could figure something out together." She looked up, her eyes guarded. "John, we've been over this. My mum is fine, and I'm fine." "Are you?" I pressed gently. "Because I see you. You're not sleeping well, you're barely eating. And the money, it's a huge amount, Carol. It represents a lot of our future. I need to understand." She closed the magazine with a snap. "There's nothing to understand. I made a decision, it's done." Her voice was firm, final. Frustration simmered within me. It was like hitting a brick wall. The more I pushed, the more she retreated. It was clear that direct appeals to her emotions or logic were no longer working. I had to find an indirect route. The following afternoon, while Carol was out grocery shopping, I decided to take a risk. I went into her home office, a space she usually kept meticulously organized, and began to search for anything that might shed light on the situation. I wasn't trying to invade her privacy for the sake of it, but I felt I had no other choice. I looked through her desk drawers, her filing cabinets, her computer. It felt wrong, intrusive, but the mystery of the missing $300,000 and Carol's suffocating silence had pushed me to this desperate point. After nearly an hour of searching, I found a small, locked box tucked away in the back of a filing cabinet. It wasn't a high-security safe, just a simple lockbox. My heart pounded. This had to be important. I rummaged through her desk drawers and, to my surprise, found a small key that fit the lock. Inside, I found a collection of documents. There were old letters, some photos, and then a small worn notebook. As I opened the notebook, I saw it was filled with Carol's handwriting, but it wasn't a diary. It was more like a ledger filled with dates, amounts, and cryptic notes. And as I scanned the entries, a chilling pattern began to emerge. The notes were filled with names I didn't recognize, brief descriptions of favors, and amounts of money that corresponded with the wire transfers to Carol's personal account. It was a record of what? Payments, loans, to whom, and for what purpose? Then, near the back of the notebook, I found an entry dated a few weeks before Christmas. It was a phone number, followed by a name, Mr. Sterling, and a note that read, "Final payment discussed, urgent." My hands trembled as I dialed the number. It felt illicit, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. The phone rang, each ring amplifying the sense of unease in my gut. Finally, a smooth, deep voice answered. "Sterling speaking." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes. Hello, I'm looking for information about a financial transaction regarding Carol Peterson." There was a brief, calculated pause. "Carol Peterson? I'm afraid I don't have any Carol Peterson in my client list." The voice was polite but firm, the tone of someone expertly deflecting. "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Well, I was given this number by a mutual acquaintance regarding a significant sum of money." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost feel him assessing me, weighing the risk. "I deal with discreet clients and sensitive matters, sir. If you have a legitimate inquiry, you'll need to be more specific, and perhaps have the authority to make such inquiries." "The money," I pressed, my voice growing firmer. $300,000. It was recently transferred from a joint account. A family matter." A subtle shift in his tone, a hint of something that sounded like recognition, masked by professional detachment. "Ah, the Peterson matter. Yes, that was handled. A delicate situation, but resolved, as per our agreement." "Agreement?" I echoed, my mind racing. "What agreement? Who did you make an agreement with?" "That information is confidential, sir," Sterling replied, his voice now colder, more businesslike. "Suffice it to say the arrangements have been made and the funds have been reallocated as per instructions." "Instructions from whom?" I demanded, my voice rising. "My client," Sterling said with finality. "And my client's instructions were clear. The matter is concluded. I suggest you speak with your wife. She's the one who orchestrated the reallocation." And with that, he hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, my mind reeling. Reallocated, orchestrated, my client. This wasn't about Carol helping her mother. This was something else entirely. A clandestine deal, a hidden agenda. And I was caught in the middle, blindsided by a wife who had seemingly orchestrated a massive financial maneuver behind my back, using the very money I thought was our security. The conversation with Sterling had left me reeling, my mind a chaotic storm of suspicion and betrayal. The term reallocated and the icy professionalism of the man on the phone painted a picture far more sinister than I had initially imagined. It wasn't about charity, it was about a transaction, a deal made with someone I didn't know by my wife, without my knowledge. I returned the lockbox to its place, my hands still shaking, my resolve hardening. I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't let Carol continue to deceive me. The silence was no longer just an uncomfortable atmosphere. It was a breeding ground for deceit. I needed a direct confrontation, and I needed it now. When Carol returned, I was waiting for her in the living room, the notebook open on the coffee table. The warm glow of the afternoon sun now seemed to mock the cold dread settling in my chest. "Carol," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the pleading or anger that had characterized our previous conversations. "We need to talk. No more evasions. No more shrugging. The truth, Carol. Now." She paused at the doorway, her eyes immediately drawn to the open notebook. The color drained from her face, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She sank onto the armchair, her posture defeated. "John," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Just don't." I found this. I spoke to someone named Sterling. He confirmed that you arranged for our savings to be reallocated, that you orchestrated it, and that it was a delicate situation that has been resolved. So, Carol, tell me, what is really going on? What was this money for? Who is Sterling? And why did you do this behind my back? She sat there, silent, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken words. I waited, my heart aching, but my resolve unwavering. I wouldn't be placated with excuses or half-truths this time. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. I was afraid, she choked out. Afraid of what? I asked, my voice softer now, seeing her distress. Afraid of losing everything, she whispered. Afraid of him. Him? My brow furrowed. Who is him, Carol? She took a shaky breath. My mother. She borrowed money from some very bad people a few years ago for a business venture that failed spectacularly. She thought she could pay them back, but she couldn't. They've been harassing her, threatening her. She was terrified. They gave her a deadline. My mind reeled. This was not what I had expected. And these bad people, they're not exactly the kind you can just ask for an extension from, are they? She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. No, they're dangerous, John. They don't play by the rules. And Sterling? I asked, gesturing to the notebook. He's connected to them? Carol nodded. He's a fixer. He handles these kinds of problems. My mother contacted him in desperation. He said he could make it all go away for a price, a very large price. And that price was $300,000 of our money, I stated, the pieces finally clicking into place, forming a grim, horrifying picture. So you took the money. You gave it to Sterling, who then presumably handled your mother's debt. And you didn't tell me because I knew you'd be angry, she confessed, her voice barely audible. Because I knew you'd think it was too risky. Because I was ashamed. And because I didn't want you involved in something so sordid. But you involved yourself, Carol. And you involved our money, our security. My voice rose, the frustration and anger finally breaking through my forced calm. Did you even consider the consequences? For us? For our retirement? For our children? I thought it was the only way to protect Mom, she sobbed. And I thought if I could just handle it myself quietly, then it would all be over and we could go back to normal. Back to normal? I scoffed, the word tasting like ashes in my mouth. Carol, there is no normal anymore. You've just revealed a secret life, a secret world you've been operating in, and you've put our entire financial future at risk. We need to go to the police, Carol. We need to report this. These people, Sterling, they can't just get away with this. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. No, John, you can't. It would put Mom in even more danger. It would put us in danger. The weight of her confession settled upon me. The immediate shock was giving way to a profound sense of betrayal, not just of our finances, but of the trust that formed the bedrock of our marriage. I had been living with a stranger, a woman capable of such secrecy and such unilateral high-stakes decisions. The path forward was unclear, shrouded in fear and uncertainty, and I knew our lives had irrevocably changed. Carol's confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The story of her mother's desperate situation, the menacing loan sharks and Carol's fixer named Sterling, painted a grim picture of a hidden crisis that had exploded into our lives. While her fear was palpable and her desire to protect her mother understandable, the sheer magnitude of her deception left me reeling. $300,000 was not just a number, it was our safety net, our future, and she had gambled it away in secret. So what you're saying is, I began, my voice hoarse, that your mother owes a considerable amount of money to dangerous people, and you paid them off through a shady intermediary to make them go away. Is that about right? Carol nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, it was the only way. They were threatening to hurt her. They weren't going to stop. And you thought keeping this from me was the best course of action. The anger was resurfacing, a hot, burning ember. Did you think I wouldn't support you? That I wouldn't help find a solution, or were you just embarrassed? She squeezed her eyes shut. A bit of both, maybe. I knew you'd be furious about the money, and yes, I was ashamed. Ashamed that Mom got into this mess, ashamed that I had to go to these lengths. Shame is one thing, Carol. Deception is another. We're married. We're supposed to face things together, not behind each other's backs. I ran a hand over my face, the weariness of the situation settling deep into my bones. This Sterling character, he's not going to just disappear, is he? You said resolved, but these kinds of people don't just let things go. What guarantees do we have that they won't come back asking for more? Carol wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the floor. Sterling assured us that this was the final payment, that it settled everything. He said his clients were satisfied. His clients, I repeated, the words chilling. And who are his clients? Do you even know? No, she admitted. Mom only knew them as associates. She was too scared to ask for details. The thought of these unknown, dangerous individuals lurking in the background, having been appeased with our hard-earned money, was unnerving. It felt like we had bought ourselves a temporary reprieve, not a permanent solution. The shadow of debt, once belonging to her mother, now loomed over us, a stark and terrifying reminder of the precariousness of our situation. So, what now? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. We've lost a significant chunk of our savings. We have no idea if these people will truly leave us alone, and our marriage, well, that's taken a pretty serious hit. Carol looked up, her eyes pleading. John, I know I messed up. Terribly. But please, we have to try and fix this. We can't let this ruin us. Fix it? I echoed, the words sounding hollow. How do we fix losing $300,000, Carol? How do we fix the fact that I can't trust you? That you've kept something this monumental from me for months? She choked back a sob. I don't know, but we have to try. Maybe we can start by being completely honest from now on. No more secrets. Whatever happens, we face it together. Her words offered a sliver of hope, a faint possibility of rebuilding what had been fractured. But the path ahead was daunting. The financial loss was significant, a setback that would require years to recover. And the emotional damage, the erosion of trust, would take even longer to mend if it ever truly could. The spectre of Carol's mother's debt, and the dangerous people who held it, would undoubtedly cast a long shadow over our lives for the foreseeable future. We had stepped into a world of shadows, and emerging into the light would be a long and arduous journey. The immediate crisis of the $300,000 had been explained, but the fallout continued to ripple through our lives, creating a chasm of unspoken tension and strained interactions. The revelation of Carol's secret dealings had fundamentally altered the dynamics of our marriage. The easy companionship, the shared laughter, the quiet comfort of knowing we were a united front, all of it felt fragile, tainted by suspicion and hurt. Evenings, which had once been a time for shared relaxation, now felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Carol would often sit across from me at the dinner table, picking at her food, her gaze distant. I tried to engage her, to talk about our day, about the twins, about anything but the elephant in the room. But the knowledge of her deception and the unresolved questions surrounding the debt hung between us like a persistent fog. "Did your mum call today?" I'd ask, trying to sound casual. "No," she'd reply, her voice flat. "She said she's trying to stay off the radar for a while." "And Sterling?" No contact. I hope that means it's really over. Each mention of these names, each question about the unresolved situation, felt like another small chip away at the already fragile foundation of our trust. I found myself scrutinizing her every move, every word, searching for any hint of further deception. Was she telling me the whole truth? Were there other secrets she was keeping? The paranoia, though unwelcome, was a constant companion. I tried to focus on work, on my woodworking, anything to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety. But the scent of sawdust no longer offered the same solace. The clean lines of the wood seemed to mock the tangled mess of our lives. My focus wavered, my concentration fragmented. One evening, I found Carol poring over our bank statements again, her brow furrowed. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. She jumped, startled. "Just looking, trying to see how we can make up for the lost savings." "We can't make up for it overnight, Carol," I said, the frustration evident. "It's going to take time, years probably, and it's going to require us working together, being completely transparent about every single penny." She nodded, but her eyes still held a flicker of apprehension. "I know, I'm committed to that," but her commitment felt hollow to me. How could I truly believe her after the months of secrecy? The financial strain was undeniable. We had to cut back on discretionary spending, postpone planned renovations, and reevaluate our retirement timeline. These were tangible consequences, but the emotional toll was far more profound. The intimacy between us had also suffered. The easy affection, the physical closeness felt awkward and forced. Each embrace, each kiss was tinged with the memory of her betrayal. I found myself pulling away, unable to fully commit to physical affection when the emotional trust was so damaged. Carol noticed, of course. Her attempts to reach out were often met with a hesitant distance from my end. "John," she said one night, her voice soft as I lay beside her, unable to sleep. "I know this is hard, for both of us, but we can't let this break us. We have to find a way back to each other." I turned to face her, the dim light of the bedside lamp casting shadows on her face. "I want to, Carol. I truly do. But trust isn't something you can just switch back on. It's earned. And right now it feels like it's gone." Her eyes welled up again. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. "I'll be completely open. I'll answer any question. I'll work twice as hard to earn back your trust. Just don't give up on us." Her plea resonated with me. Despite the hurt, despite the anger, there was a deep love for her, a shared history that couldn't be erased overnight. But the path to rebuilding that trust was long and uncertain, paved with the ruins of her deception and the lingering fear of the unknown forces that had taken our money. We were in uncharted territory, and the journey back to a healthy marriage would be more challenging than anything we had ever faced. Weeks turned into months. The initial shock of the $300,000 vanishing act had somewhat subsided, replaced by a gnawing routine of careful budgeting and cautious living. Carol, true to her word, had been meticulously transparent. Every expense, no matter how small, was accounted for. She'd share bank statements willingly, answer questions without hesitation, and initiated conversations about our financial future with a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. This newfound openness was a welcome change, and I found myself slowly, tentatively, beginning to trust her again. We started small, rebuilding the connection that had been so severely damaged. We'd go for walks, talk about our days, and even managed a few movie nights. The laughter, though still a little hesitant, began to return to our home. One Saturday, while Carol was at the grocery store, I decided to revisit her office, not with the intention of prying, but to find a sense of closure. I wanted to see if there was anything more concrete I could glean about the situation with her mother, to try and put the entire episode behind us. I looked through the lockbox again, but found nothing new. Then I opened her personal laptop, which she had left on her desk. I wasn't looking for secrets anymore, but for context, for understanding. I found a folder labeled Mom's Situation. Inside, there were scanned copies of letters from Carol's mother, detailing her growing fear and desperation. There were also emails exchanged between Carol and Sterling, confirming dates, amounts, and reassurances. It was all there, laid bare. The exchanges confirmed that the $300,000 was indeed the final payment, and Sterling's last communication was a curt message stating, "Matter concluded. Clients satisfied. No further contact necessary." Reading through these documents brought a sense of relief, albeit a grim one. It confirmed that for now the immediate threat seemed to have passed. The money was gone, a painful loss. But the danger to her mother, and by extension to us, appeared to have receded. When Carol returned, I was sitting in the living room, a copy of one of her emails to Sterling in my hand. I decided to broach the subject directly, not as an accusation, but as a step towards finality. "Carol," I said, holding up the email, "I saw this. Sterling's final message." She looked at it, then at me, her expression a mixture of apprehension and acceptance. "Yes," he said it was over. "And you believe him?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. She hesitated for a moment. "I have to, John. What else can I do? We paid what they asked for, and he assured me—" "I know what he assured you," I said, my tone softening. "And I'm glad that for now it seems to be resolved. We've lost the money, and that's a huge blow. But if the threat is gone, then maybe we can start to rebuild." A genuine smile finally touched her lips, a smile that reached her eyes. "I want that, John, more than anything." We talked for a long time that evening, not just about the money, but about the fear, the shame, and the immense relief. It felt like a turning point, a moment where we could finally begin to put the past behind us and focus on our future. However, a small, persistent doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Sterling's words, Clients satisfied, echoed. Who were these clients? And what was the nature of their business that required such a hefty, discreet payment? While the immediate danger seemed to have passed, the mystery surrounding the shadowy figures who had held Carol's mother and our savings hostage remained. It was a loose end, a lingering question mark that I knew, deep down, might resurface when we least expected it. But for now, the fragile hope of rebuilding our lives and our trust was enough to sustain us. The spring air was thick with the scent of blooming lilacs, a stark contrast to the lingering emotional chill that had settled over our household for months. The twins, Sarah and Michael, had announced they were coming home for a long weekend, a welcome distraction from the recent turmoil. Their impending arrival brought a mix of excitement and apprehension. While I longed for the normalcy their presence always provided, I also dreaded the potential questions, the subtle probing about our finances, and the possibility of them sensing the undercurrent of tension that still existed between Carol and me. We tidied the house, stocked the fridge with their favorite foods, and Carol even baked a batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies, the aroma filling the air and bringing a semblance of pre-crisis comfort. As I watched her move around the kitchen, a small, almost involuntary smile touched my lips. She seemed lighter, more at ease than she had in months. The transparency, the effort she'd made to rebuild trust, was clearly paying off, albeit slowly. When their car pulled into the driveway, my heart gave a familiar lurch of joy. Sarah, ever the more demonstrative of the two, practically tackled me in a hug. Michael, always more reserved, offered a warm embrace and a sheepish grin. The house, for the first time in what felt like ages, was filled with the familiar, comforting chaos of their energy. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, filled with stories of college life, future plans, and good-natured teasing. I found myself relaxing, genuinely enjoying their company. The weight of our recent struggles momentarily lifted. Carol, too, seemed to shed her anxieties, laughing freely at their anecdotes, her eyes sparkling. However, as the evening wore on, a subtle shift occurred. Michael, now 20, had always been observant, a keen reader of people. He caught my eye across the table and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards Carol. I understood the silent communication. He knew something was up. Later, after Sarah had retired to her old room, Michael and I found ourselves in the den, ostensibly watching a basketball game, though neither of us was truly paying attention. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the comfortable silence of shared understanding. "Everything okay, Dad?" Michael finally asked, his voice low. "Mum's been different since Christmas." I hesitated. The instinct to protect Carol, to maintain the facade of normalcy for the kids, warred with the need for honesty. But Michael was not a child anymore. He was a young man, observant and intelligent. "It's been a difficult few months, Michael," I admitted, choosing my words carefully. "Your mum's mother, Martha, got into some serious financial trouble. Some very dangerous people." Michael's brow furrowed. "Mum's mom? What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involved threats and pressure," I said. "And your mum? She took a significant amount of money from our joint savings to help her mother resolve the situation." Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. "Whoa, Mom did that? Without talking to you?" I nodded. "Yes, it was a big shock, a breach of trust. We've been working through it." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "So that's why she's been so quiet, and why you guys have seemed a little off." He paused, then asked, "Did she get the money back?" "No," I replied. "The money is gone. It was a settlement, a final payment." Michael was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "That's a lot of money for Mom to just give away." He looked at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Is Mom okay? Is Grandma okay?" "Your grandmother is safe and the immediate threat has passed," I reassured him. "And Carol, she's been trying. She's been very open about everything since then. It's been a process, but we're working on it." Michael nodded slowly. "I'm glad Mom's okay. And I guess I get it. Family's important. But wow, Dad, that's a lot to go through." He didn't press for more details, which I appreciated. He seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation without needing every sordid detail. His understanding, his quiet acceptance was a small comfort. It meant that perhaps despite the challenges, we could still present a united front to our children. As Michael joined his sister the next morning, leaving the house once again to the familiar quiet, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The twins' visit had been a reminder of what we were fighting for, not just our financial stability, but the integrity of our family and the trust that bound us together. The unspoken truth about the $300,000 had been revealed to one more person, but it felt less like a burden and more like a necessary step towards healing. The road ahead was still long, but the presence of our children and their quiet understanding had offered a glimmer of hope. The twins' visit, while a welcome respite, had also served as a stark reminder of the underlying issues that still needed addressing. Michael's quiet understanding of the situation, though appreciated, also highlighted the fact that we couldn't simply sweep the financial consequences under the rug. The $300,000 was gone, and while the immediate danger had seemingly passed, the hole in our finances was a gaping wound that required a long-term plan. We sat down together a few days after the twins had left, a stack of financial documents spread between us. The mood was somber, but devoid of the acrimony that had characterized our earlier discussions. Carol's commitment to transparency was unwavering, and I, in turn, was determined to approach the situation with a focus on solutions rather than blame. "Okay," I began, pushing a thick ledger towards her. "Let's look at this realistically. We need to figure out how long it's going to take us to rebuild. Our retirement funds have taken a massive hit. The twins' college expenses are still on the horizon, though thankfully they're nearing the end of their studies." Carol nodded, her expression earnest. "I know. I've been crunching numbers too. It's daunting. We'll have to be incredibly disciplined. No more impulse purchases, no more unnecessary luxuries. We might even need to consider dipping into my retirement savings to supplement ours, which I know isn't ideal. And my woodworking business," I added. "I've been considering taking on more custom commissions, larger projects that would yield a higher profit margin, even if they demand more of my time." "Anything that needs to be done, John," she said, her voice firm. "I'm fully on board. We'll cut back wherever we can. Vacations will have to be put on hold, maybe even postponed for a few years. We'll cook at home more, pack lunches for work." The list of sacrifices grew as we spoke, a sobering testament to the impact of the lost funds. It wasn't just about tightening our belts. It was about fundamentally altering our lifestyle, at least for the foreseeable future. The dreams of a comfortable, carefree retirement felt distant, replaced by the stark reality of diligent saving and careful planning. "We also need to think about insurance," I said, tapping a folder. "Carol, what kind of insurance does your mother have? Health insurance? Life insurance? If she's still facing any lingering financial vulnerability, we need to ensure she has a safety net that doesn't rely on our savings." Carol's face clouded over slightly. "She has basic health insurance, but life insurance? I don't think so. She's always been hesitant to get it." "We need to revisit that," I stated, my resolve firm. "Not just for her, but for her peace of mind, and for ours. We can't have another situation like this arise." The conversation was pragmatic, focused on the tangible steps needed to recover. Yet beneath the surface of financial planning, the emotional toll was evident. The casual ease of our financial discussions had been replaced by a cautious, almost clinical approach. Every decision felt weighed down by the knowledge of how easily our financial security had been jeopardized. "This is going to be tough," Carol admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is," I agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she squeezed mine tightly. "But we'll do it together. We have to." The physical act of holding hands, the simple gesture of shared commitment, felt like a significant step forward. It was a silent acknowledgement that despite the painful lessons learned, we were still partners, still willing to face the challenges ahead as a united front. The financial reckoning was underway, and while the road to recovery would be long and arduous, the shared commitment to rebuilding was the first, crucial step. The shadow of the $300,000 would linger, but it wouldn't define us. We would rebuild, piece by painstaking piece, with transparency and a renewed sense of shared purpose. The meticulous financial planning and the renewed commitment to transparency had brought a fragile sense of order back into our lives. We were diligently rebuilding our savings, making conscious sacrifices, and Carol's openness had begun to mend the deep fissures in our trust. Yet a nagging disquiet persisted, a subtle undercurrent of unease that refused to dissipate entirely. It stemmed from the lingering questions about the true nature of the debt, the identity of Sterling's clients, and the possibility that the resolution Carol had been assured of was merely a temporary pause. One quiet Tuesday evening, as Carol was engrossed in a budgeting spreadsheet, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. I answered, expecting a telemarketer. "Hello?" A gruff, unfamiliar voice responded. "Is this John Peterson?" "Speaking," I replied, my guard immediately going up. "I'm calling about a debt, a Mr. Sterling's associates." My blood ran cold. My hand instinctively reached for Carol's, which she instinctively pulled away from, sensing my sudden tension. "Sterling?" I managed to croak out. I don't know who you are." "You don't need to know who I am," the voice said, devoid of emotion. "What you need to know is that the previous arrangement was incomplete. There are still outstanding matters. A final settlement needs to be discussed." "Incomplete," I repeated, my mind racing. "We paid in full. We were assured it was resolved." A low chuckle, devoid of humor, came from the other end. "Assurances from Sterling are fluid. Depends on who's talking and who's listening. The people who provided the original loan are not satisfied. They want their pound of flesh." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you want? What's the new demand?" "We're not demanding anything, not yet. We're just opening a dialogue, making sure you're aware of the situation, because the consequences of non-compliance can be unpleasant for everyone involved." The implied threat was crystal clear. The danger wasn't over. It had merely shifted, morphed into a new, more insidious form. "We don't have any more money," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor of fear. "We paid what we were told was the final amount." "That's unfortunate," the voice replied smoothly. "Perhaps you should have considered that before engaging in such transactions. We'll be in touch." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hand clammy. Carol was watching me, her face etched with a dawning terror. "Who was that, John?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone claiming to be from Sterling's associates," I said, my voice grim. "They said the payment wasn't considered final, that there are outstanding matters." Carol's eyes widened, tears welling up. "No, that can't be right. Sterling assured us." "Sterling's assurances seem to be as reliable as a screen door on a submarine," I said, the bitterness lacing my words. "It seems our problem isn't over, Carol. It's just evolving." The relief we had begun to feel, the tentative steps towards rebuilding, now seemed naive, fragile. We had walked out of one fire, only to find ourselves standing at the edge of another, its heat a chilling reminder of the unseen threats that still lurked in the shadows. The debt was no longer just a financial burden, it was a tangible danger, a constant menace that threatened to engulf us. We had tried to close the door on this chapter, but it seemed the past in its most menacing form was determined to keep knocking. The phone call had shattered the fragile peace we had painstakingly cultivated. The illusion of resolution had evaporated, replaced by the chilling reality that we were still entangled with dangerous individuals. Fear, a cold and unwelcome guest, had returned to our home, settling in the corners of rooms, whispering doubts in the quiet hours of the night. Carol was devastated. "I thought it was over," she sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "I truly believed Sterling had handled it. I was so stupid." "It's not your fault, Carol," I said, though the words felt hollow. "We were both misled. We both thought we were doing the right thing by protecting your mother." I sat beside her, putting an arm around her shaking shoulders. "But now we know it's not over, and we need to figure out what to do next." The idea of going to the police was revisited, but the fear for her mother's safety remained paramount. Reporting the threats, the extortion, could escalate the situation, making Martha an even bigger target. Sterling had been vague about his clients, but the implication was clear. These were not people who would react well to unwanted attention. "We can't afford to pay them again," Carol said, her voice thick with despair. "We've drained our savings. We're living paycheck to paycheck, trying to rebuild. There's no more money to give." "I know," I replied, my mind racing. "But maybe there's another way. We need to gather more information. We need to understand who these people are, what their leverage is. Blindly paying them off isn't a sustainable solution. It's just delaying the inevitable." Over the next few days, we walked on eggshells. Every unexpected phone call, every unfamiliar car passing our house sent a jolt of adrenaline through us. Carol, driven by a desperate need to rectify her mistake, began digging deeper, reaching out to her mother again, trying to coax more details out of her about the original loan and the people involved. Martha, initially reluctant, eventually relented under Carol's persistent, tearful pleas. She revealed that the original loan had been from a less reputable source, a group known for their aggressive collection tactics. They had initially approached her through a seemingly legitimate business associate who had then disappeared, leaving her indebted to a more sinister entity. Sterling had been brought in by this associate, not by Martha directly, and he had acted as an intermediary, taking Carol's money and presumably passing it on. He said he dealt with them regularly, Martha explained, her voice shaky, that he knew how to handle them, that this payment would make them back off completely. The implication was clear. Sterling had either been dishonest, or he had underestimated the ruthlessness of his own clients, or perhaps he had simply taken the money and washed his hands of the situation. "We need to find out who these original lenders are," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. "We need to know who we're dealing with. If they're truly satisfied, then this new demand is likely a bluff, or perhaps a misunderstanding that Sterling failed to address. But if they're not, then we're in serious trouble." It was a calculated gamble. Information was our only weapon. We couldn't fight them with money, and direct confrontation seemed too dangerous. So we decided to try and find Sterling again. Carol found his contact information in her old emails, a burner phone number, and an encrypted email address. She sent him a carefully worded email, stating that we believed the matter was resolved and inquiring about the current situation, expressing concern about the recent contact we had received. It was a risky move, potentially alerting Sterling to our continued awareness, but we felt we had no other option. A day later, a cryptic reply arrived. "The situation is complex. My clients are impatient. Direct communication is ill-advised. However, a revised arrangement could be explored, for a significant additional fee, of course." The response confirmed our fears. Sterling was likely playing both sides, or was simply trying to extract more money from us. But it also confirmed that the original lenders were still a factor. The gamble had paid off, at least in terms of gathering more information. We were still in the dark about their identities, but we knew the threat was real, and that Sterling was not a reliable ally, but possibly another part of the problem. Sterling's evasive and self-serving reply had confirmed our suspicions. He was not an ally, but a potential manipulator, likely seeking to profit further from our predicament. The idea of paying him an additional fee was out of the question. We had no more money to spare, and even if we did, trusting him again felt like walking into a trap. We knew we had to find a different approach, one that didn't involve throwing more money at the problem or relying on the dubious assurances of a fixer. "We can't keep playing this game with Sterling," I said to Carol, pacing the living room. "He's just going to keep bleeding us dry. We need to find out who his clients are, and we need to do it without him." Carol, who had been researching online security and discreet communication methods, looked up from her laptop. "I've been looking into some private investigators, discreet ones. They might be able to trace Sterling's operations, find out who he's working for." The idea was expensive, but potentially necessary. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "It's not cheap," she admitted, "but it might be our only chance to get concrete information, to understand the real threat, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way to resolve this permanently, without further payments." We decided to pool what little discretionary funds we had left, along with a small portion of my business's operating capital, to hire a private investigator. It was a significant risk, dipping into already depleted resources, but the thought of these unseen threats hanging over our heads indefinitely was unbearable. The investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, was discreet and efficient. She focused on Sterling's known associates and financial trails, piecing together a picture of his network. It took weeks of patient work, but eventually she uncovered a critical piece of information. Sterling wasn't just a middleman. He was deeply involved with a small but notorious organized crime syndicate that specialized in predatory lending and debt collection. "These aren't your average loan sharks, John," Ms. Davies explained during a confidential meeting. "They operate with a high degree of sophistication. They use intermediaries like Sterling to keep their hands clean. The original loan to Martha Peterson was likely a deliberate tactic, designed to ensnare her into a debt trap from which escape was virtually impossible. When Carol stepped in, Sterling saw an opportunity to make a substantial profit from both ends. The revelation was chilling. It explained the ruthlessness, the incompleteness of the arrangement. Sterling hadn't been acting solely on behalf of the lenders. He had been manipulating the situation for his own gain, likely ensuring that a portion of the money stayed with him while the rest went to the syndicate. So, the $300,000 was just the initial payment, I said, my voice grim. Sterling likely took a cut, and the syndicate is now seeing us as a continuing source of income. Precisely, Ms. Davies confirmed, and their methods of collection are not polite requests. They involve intimidation, threats, and escalating pressure. Given that you've had direct contact with one of their enforcers, they know you're aware and involved. The information was a double-edged sword. It provided clarity, but also confirmed the immense danger we were in. However, it also gave us leverage. Knowing the syndicate's structure and Sterling's role within it allowed us to formulate a new strategy. We need to approach this differently, I said to Carol after our meeting with Davies. We can't keep paying, we can't keep hiding. We need to make them understand that we're not an easy mark anymore. We have information now, and if they continue to harass us, we have the means to expose them. It was a dangerous proposition, a gamble that could backfire spectacularly. But the alternative, living in constant fear, depleted financially and emotionally, was no longer an option. We decided, with Ms. Davies' guidance, to send a carefully worded yet firm communication to Sterling. It didn't threaten exposure directly, but alluded to our knowledge of his dealings with the syndicate and our willingness to cooperate with law enforcement if the harassment continued. It was a calculated risk, a move designed to show them we were no longer easy prey. The ball was now in their court. The weeks following our calculated gamble were fraught with agonizing suspense. We waited, breath held, for any sign of retaliation, any indication that our move had backfired. The silence from Sterling and his associates was deafening and, in its own way, more unnerving than the threats themselves. Had we pushed too hard? Had we inadvertently ignited a wildfire we couldn't control? Carol and I found ourselves constantly scanning our surroundings, jumping at every unexpected sound. The fragile trust we had rebuilt was tested again, not by deception, but by the sheer weight of external pressure and fear. We had emptied our savings, risked our safety, and all for a problem that originated with a misguided act of familial loyalty. Then, a week after we had sent our message, an encrypted email arrived in Carol's inbox. It was from Sterling. The tone was different this time, less confident, more resigned. He stated that his clients had reconsidered the situation. Given the complications that had arisen, and the potential for further unwanted scrutiny, they had decided to write off the outstanding debt. He also conveyed a clear, albeit veiled, warning that we should not attempt to pursue any further avenues of investigation or disclosure, as it could reopen Pandora's box. We read the email multiple times, disbelief warring with profound relief. The threat, it seemed, had receded. We had gambled, and by some miracle we had won. The $300,000 was gone, a painful and significant loss, but the immediate danger had passed. The syndicate, it appeared, valued discretion and avoiding exposure more than extracting further payment from a situation that had become too complicated. The aftermath was a slow, arduous process of healing and rebuilding. The financial recovery would take years. We meticulously adjusted our budget, Carol diligently tracked every penny, and I took on more woodworking projects, working longer hours to supplement our income. The dreams of lavish retirement cruises were replaced by more modest plans, but the shared purpose of rebuilding our financial security brought us closer. The emotional scars, however, ran deeper. The incident had irrevocably changed us. The easy trust, the blissful ignorance of our previous life was gone, replaced by a heightened awareness of the fragility of our security and the dark underbelly that could exist just beneath the surface of everyday life. Carol carried the weight of her initial deception, a constant reminder of the risks she had taken. I, in turn, had to actively work to shed the lingering suspicion, to fully embrace her commitment to transparency, and to forgive the mistake that had nearly cost us everything. We learned to communicate more openly, to address issues as they arose, rather than letting them fester in silence. Our marriage, forged in the crucible of crisis, was stronger in some ways, more resilient, but also more scarred. We understood the value of honesty, the importance of partnership, and the devastating consequences of secrets. The incident with Martha's debt and the subsequent $300,000 loss became a defining chapter in our lives. It was a story of fear, deception, and ultimately of a hard-won resilience. We had faced a terrifying reality, navigated treacherous waters, and emerged, not unscathed, but alive, together, and with a profound appreciation for the quiet normalcy we had once taken for granted. The house, once again filled with the scent of sawdust and the aroma of Carol's baking, felt like home, but a home that carried the indelible marks of our past struggles, a testament to the lessons learned and the strength we found in facing them together. The shadow of the $300,000 might linger, but it no longer defined us. We were moving forward with cautious optimism, rebuilding our lives, one honest conversation, one shared sacrifice at a time.